a, a liberated individual with beards, or long hair, or long nails. And we didn't have any instrument to cut them. So apparently the body adjusts to do what normally can do to survive. You know, many other parts of your body didn't function normally. And people didn't walk, people were shuffling, you know. I can't shut this up. Then we got into the cattle cart from Buchenwald to Neubrandenburg. We nearly died because this time it was not packed cattle cars, but the soldiers who were guarding, who were ruling over us, were in the same cattle wagon, and it was cold, you know, January is very cold in Europe. So they made a fire somehow. And
in the wagon?
In the wagon. So the monoxide nearly killed us. I remember everybody leaning out and what little they had in their guts to empty it. I remember that as we arrived to Neubrandenburg, because it was really a city, from a distance I could see the lights and people just moving around. So it was a factory very close to the city proper. And there was no really work there in the factory. They didn't manufacture any more aircraft. They were just dreaming, Germans, but it was a good dream because it helped us survive. We did maintenance work, which meant that it made some masonry wall, mixed mortar, and as it happened, I was painting. Now, if you are a painter, it is not very steady to be standing on a ladder to paint. So that happened to me. You know, the way the situations in a concentration camp work is that they nominate another slave as a couple. The couples are the ones who are urging or hitting people to keep moving. Anyway, here I was on a ladder and I had to lift up a heavy pail and I could hardly do it. It turned out at the same time that the couple was going under my ladder and it was hit on the head. So I didn't know, maybe it's my end of my life coming up. So I ended up with a good beating. I figured it was cheap. I was lucky, right? At one time, I remember that we had some older Hungarian Jewish guys in there, and that we had some young Ukrainian boys. In this Neubrandenburg, we were about 300 slaves working. And they were some Ukrainians and Poles, but they were Dutch and Belgians and some other nationalities, but we were this group of Hungarian Jewish guys. There were no women at that point. I saw some of these Ukrainian guys run after this weak Hungarian Jewish guy, and tried to keep hitting him. So I don't think, I just went there and shoved them away. Well, on the second thought, it wasn't a good idea. I was attacked in our bathroom, they were surrounded with them, and I ended up sitting in a corner and sitting on the floor to ward them away, somehow not to be hurt. After a while, some other guys, slave guys, talked to some of the Dutch guys because I wanted to practice my English. So I talked to them a little bit, and they kind of surrounded me, and after a while it was over. But you never know any minute when you get into being hit. I forgot to tell you about a very big beating I got in Buchenwald. They told me that I have to bring the kettle of brown water in the morning. So we went and we struggled, but we carried it in to our place. And I don't know what went in my mind. I figured, well, rather than later when it is cold, I try to drink it before, while it is warm. It doesn't mean that I want twice as much, I just didn't think it through. And when they saw me dip in to get a drink, I got a beating like of which you can't imagine. Finally, I realized I better drop to the ground to stop it. And finally that stopped it, but it was a horrible beating. We worked in Neubrandenburg until about April. And a very strange thing happened. Someone came in and started to yell all the Jews to gather together. And there was a truck waiting. So all the Jewish guys had to get away. And you can't think about a good reason why Jewish guys are separated. It means death is coming. My Dutch friend kind of say goodbye to me knowing that they won't see me anymore. So they loaded us into trucks, and a few hours later we arrived to Ravensbrück. That Ravensbrück is a tremendous camp, I am understanding. There was a tremendous large women's camp and a very large men's camp. But they shoved us in as we arrived into one barrack. We just looked around, we didn't know what happened. As hours went by, we started to realize that we don't have the same routine here. There was no appel, no counting. And the little food arrived very late. Then when we went out, we saw piles of dead bodies like of which you can't imagine. It must have been about 10 foot high, and several street blocks long. So a dead, skinny human skeleton is like just a piece of wood.
Were these bodies, were they gassed, or do you know if it was just from starvation alone?
So this is what I figured out later, that we are late for our own cremation, because these bodies were dead and they're ready to be cremated. So that was a lucky thing. It was, somehow we ended up here with it must have been tens of thousands of bodies. Then the next lucky thing happened. Usually, when they had to empty a camp, which apparently it later turned out that they emptied the camp because the Allied troops were very close. Usually when they empty a camp, they either murder everybody, as far as I read about it later, or they put them in a death march, which is marching toward another concentration camp, and if you fall down, they shoot you. You don't survive on those runs. And neither of this happened. We were packed into wagons. And not only that, we got American packages. We got little packages for the eldest and the Juden. Anyway, we opened it. There were cans of food there, spam and margarine or whatever. I don't remember. We couldn't eat it. Anybody who tried to eat it died. So the only thing we could get a few bites on was a piece of chocolate that was in it. So here we were in a wagon with all these packages, and we were taken to another concentration camp.
Where did the packages come from?
Obviously from the United States,
Right,
but most likely they ended up on a table of the German officers. That's what I figure. And the only reason they must have given us, that's what I imagine, is that they figured that if they find us with packages, they will be looked at as kinder people of something. I'm not able to read their minds, but that's all that comes to mind. But here we were, in a couple of days later, ending up in Berlin. Now, Berlin is a small concentration camp very north of Germany. This was the only part in Germany that in April was not in Allied hands yet. And when we arrived, we were pushed into a barrack that wasn't finished. It had masonry walls and a roof on, but no floor. It was clay, not even flat. And the windows and the door openings were empty. So we just kind of leaned against each other to rest somehow. But here we were with packages. And the first one who went to the latrine got attacked and took away all their cans. So here, the gift became a liability here. when I first realized I was in a concentration camp in Buchenwald, I was looking around to be next to a guy I knew somehow. And I found a brother of a friend of mine who was there. So from then on, we were always close to each other. I think that helped me too, because there was no relationship between anybody. I just have to put this in a hole somewhere. It keeps telling me I have to eat. 1 second. So it was the last days of April that I figured that we arrived to Berlin. We were liberated within a week or so by the American army. The last night we spent in a cattle car. The Germans marched us in. All of a sudden, everybody aroused, wherever we were, and they kept packing us into cattle cars. There was no room, but they kept shoving. The people were hit to get into the cars. I saw some people fall, some of the slaves fall on the ground. We were packed in so tightly that they spent the whole night standing. And by friction, I was in the air. I tried to sit down, but when I started to slow down, even my nose, which really didn't smell anymore, was overcome with the odor of these bodies. And in the morning, somebody opened the door and everybody piled out, and we didn't know what. Nobody gave the instructions. So we start walking out, looking around, saw the dead bodies of the people who were hit, pushed into they were pushed into the wagons, and we kept walking. And after a while, somebody said, "Look up. There is nobody in the tower." This is a kind of guard towers they had everywhere. Nobody is in a guard tower. So apparently the German guards escaped, left, and here we were.
Left all the prisoners in the camp.
Right. Well, they were people who were in that concentration camp a long time, and they knew where the storage facility were, and they broke in. So they broke in, and everybody had a utensil to get their food once a day. So we lined up, and from the people were dishing out some kind of cereal-like thing. They don't make in Europe cereal like we have in the United States, but it was some kind of material that you make for breakfast. So we started to eat, and then something horrible came. The prisoners got guns. And all of a sudden, we Jewish guys started to be afraid that they were envying us before with the cans. So we better somehow get away and hide. But before the evening came for hiding, a jeep came in, looked around, said something, nobody understood, and left. And then about 15, 20 minutes later, another jeep came with some French soldiers and US soldiers, and they told us that we are liberated. Another amazing thing happened, which I don't know anybody else experienced. All of a sudden, the Greeks, prisoners, was a large number of them who were apparently operating the kitchen, just stood up and started to sing the Greek national anthem. And the amazing thing that happened, that all the shuffling crowd stopped. And they didn't move. Kind of the humanity came back to respect things. And then came the Polish national anthem and other national anthems. And the people didn't move, they just stood there celebrating the occasion. And then we were the Jewish guys from Hungary. We wouldn't sing the Hungarian national anthem. So we started to sing the Hatikva. And they didn't move. People respected. And then we went to the cattle wagons, and that's where we slept, just for security. And next morning, we decided we don't want to go back to the camp. We started to walk. And we went to Val, and after a while, there was more or less a highway, and we just walked, just one direction, figuring that we end up in some place, some larger town. And the first thing I saw, some GIs dropped down a newspaper, and I picked it up. And that's when I found out that Roosevelt died. And the next thing I know, some GI grabbed the paper from my hand because he wanted it. Anyway, there we were, and we were starving. And we went into, this is farmland around it. So we went into one of the farmhouses and asked for food. They nearly beat us out. So luckily I remembered my English. And I went up to a GI and in a few words explained that we came from prison here and we are starved. Can you help us get food? And he came in with us, and we got the biggest scrambled eggs platter that we have seen for years. And we were able to...
Was it okay for you to eat that? I mean, if you were...
We didn't eat much. It was just, I'm looking at all what was displayed there. We didn't overeat, we couldn't take it. But we had enough strength to walk on, and before night, we arrived to the town of Schwerin. And as we got into the city, there was a big airfield. And then as we looked in, we saw a large fence enclosure with German soldiers' uniforms, people with uniforms. So apparently the captured Germans were surrounded and fenced off. And then I saw a small unit of GIs, and I went over there and try to see if we can somehow get food. The guy's name I met is still in my memory, and I saw him for a long time because his name was Leo Etter, and he heard me out, and he said that after they finish eating, the leftovers are ours. And we settled into one of the empty buildings in that airport, because it was empty. Apparently the German Air Force people were occupying it originally. So that's how we settled in. And later that became a large displaced person camp.
I guess that was really thorough, and I'm really glad that you shared the pictures and you were able to tell us all that. I guess I just have a few just like fill-in questions.
Sure.
I guess I just wanted to ask. You mentioned your, right when the Nazis had occupied Hungary
Right.
in '44.
Right.
You said that your father's store was affected. How was your father's clothing store, like in terms of the? Can you just elaborate on the Christian?
They took it away. They emptied the store and took it away.
Okay.
It's such a tiny store that even when I went back to Hungary with my wife about 12 years ago, the iron curtain that was closing it was closed. Nobody occupied it. But I was there when my father was in a forced labor camp, and his partner too. So all the wives, my mother and his wife, were there when they took the store. Made us open it, and they carried everything out.
Do you know what happened to any of your siblings or your parents or any other family members?
I told you I'm one of the luckiest person. They all survived.
Wow.
Both of my sisters survived, and they are still living in the United States. And my parents survived, and after there was a Russian occupation of Hungary, and after the Russian occupation ended, they applied for visas to the United States because they knew that we were here. So they couldn't get so they went to Israel. And later they were here in the United States too. So we are, that's what I'm saying, I'm an exceptionally lucky person.
I guess the other thing, I wrote down about the military barracks that you stayed in. I can't remember if it were, it must have been before you went to Buchenwald.
Right, you see, then we were coming back from the forced labor work in Erchi.
Right.
They just shoved us in there and kept us in a barracks, which was a closed space until they ended up in a cattle wagons.
Right. Were those military barracks, were they German military barracks?
No, they were Hungarian
They were
barracks in
Hungarian.
Budapest. But I couldn't describe it. I don't remember anymore.
I guess the last thing I wanted to fill in, when you initially got onto the cattle wagons, on your way eventually to Buchenwald, what were obviously eating was very minimal. Can you just describe was there any sort of food or water that was passed around cattle wags? Because it seemed like you were on
No.
there for a while.
Well, sure. My memory is not clear of that, but I know it was minimal because starvation got worse and worse. But there was some kind of liquid that we were handed, and some kind of ersatz bread. One slice of it is never bigger than that. In a concentration camp too, you couldn't name the food, but you were given. You got a liquid and some pieces of vegetable in it, some turnips or who knows what. It wasn't really delicious to eat. It wasn't flavorsome anyway. But it served the purpose of keeping us somehow alive.
I don't have any other questions. Do any of you have questions? Okay. All right. I think we are done.